There we go. Liz, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Very pleased to have you here on the podcast. Thank you. Um, yeah, I mean, I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I'd like to talk to you about based on looking at your lovely writing and your lovely material and your ACIM mentor. Is that like a blog? Would you describe that as?
I call it my newsletter. It's a blog as well. It goes out both to both. Yeah. My
Yeah,
writing. Yeah. The weekly writing. Yeah.
yeah, really lovely. And the intervals of it being weekly, is that something that's come to pass just naturally, or how's that come about?
When I started out, gosh, 18 years ago, whenever I started putting them out, it was twice a week. I'd had a backlog of years of, I guess, information. It was just pouring out of me, but eventually I got it down into a routine of a weekly article that I was putting out.
Lovely.
And it was primarily to, let people know that I was there as a life coach and a mentor. That's what I was. But the writing, in a sense, the teaching in that regard, um, to some degree took over. I mean, I still do the mentoring and life coaching. That's my primary source of income. But the teaching in that sense became basically what I was embodying. So that's what that's what happens. It takes over. You think you know what you're doing, and then it takes over. That happened to me several times over the years. Yeah.
And I tell you what I found quite fascinating as well is just contemplating almost like just thinking of the journey of like learning and how the end result, or I don't know if it's the end result, but say a result of that journey and the study is people would be looking for the revelation, the peek behind the curtain, or however you want to describe it. But what I found fascinating, obviously, I'll ask you about your shift of consciousness in 2018 or 2019. But there's revelations very early on, wasn't there? Which I just found that really captivating. Like, wow.
Yeah. Well, I thought it began when I picked up the course in '84. I was 20 years old, and I right away. I had mystical experiences and a direct revelation of God. I've since remembered that I had an episode as a young child, probably like between 7 and 9, where it's like a period of grace. I mean, spirit was here. And the weird thing, I not only totally forgot that, but when I remember it now, I remember that there were times when I did remember it, but I've also forgotten that I remembered it. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
I mean, it's the weirdest recovered memory. I mean, you usually hear about people. It was traumatic for ego, of course, back then, but I mean, it wasn't for whatever reason, for a reason I do not yet know. And I don't know if there's still yet more to remember, because obviously I didn't know I'd forgotten. You know, so maybe there will be more to remember. But I apparently had this episode as a child. And basically, so when the course came to me, it came into my life when I was 20. um, right away when I read it, I felt like I wrote it. But now I have a better understanding of why I felt that way. I mean, I had already had, some of these experiences.
Mhm.
And then I started having them right then. I mean, but as far as I knew, they were new to me at the age of 20. They were new, and especially the direct revelation was shattering, absolutely shattering. It took me like a week to get my mind back together. I mean, just waiting for all the pieces to fall back into place. And so I knew right away that what the course was saying was true about only God is real. That's what it kind of came down to. And it just kind of went from there.
And do you get what I mean with that sort of sense of like sequencing of that, of like, for most people, if they didn't have that initial exposure to that direct experience, then
Yeah.
they're studying earnestly for, I don't know, let's say a few decades, in the hope that they clear the interference to the point where they're receptive to that frequency. But for it to come in the way it did, it's quite unique, isn't it? Do you think?
Well, I've since, of course, heard from people their own stories of things like that, but it's fairly rare, and it comes in varying degrees too, the awareness or what have you. And because what happened to me was I had that episode. I mean, I had that at 20. I remembered it. I always remembered it. It was with me kind of from then on in a way. But I didn't have any mystical experience again until 2017, except for maybe one, in the intervening years, a couple of, here and there, brief oneness experiences.
Mm,
But uh, but overall, the mystical stuff was just completely gone, and I always wanted it back. I always hoped it would come back, and kind of expected it would.
mm,
Um, but what I thought was going on was I was pretty much integrating in all those years what the experiences had shown me, and developing my awareness of spirit being with me all the time.
mm,
And I was focused on developing that awareness of what I had experienced, that it was really here all the time in the form of spirit. And even though I wasn't having the mystical experiences, I felt like they had shown me something, and now it was time to integrate it and kind of live it out. But so when it came again in 2017, it was just before the shift. I started having the mystical experiences again.
right.
I knew, I obviously recognized them, and I was happy to have back, what I had. But it also came with this, holy crap, this is going to be, I'm going to go through something intense and awful. And that's basically it, because before I'd had basically it was like glimpses, like you said, behind the curtain,
Mm, mm.
but now the shift was going to happen, and the shift wasn't going to be what the way ego had always kind of set it up, And it's like, no, this isn't going to be like that. This is going to, for ego, it was like, oh, the worst nightmare that was occurring. Oh, yeah. So, I kind of warn people when they say, oh, I want to have those experiences. I'm like, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it, and it's not going to be what you think it is. I mean, even at 20, it was pretty, intense and shattering, and I had no background for it, framework for it.
Mm,
At least when it came again in my 50s, it was like, well, I've kind of been to some of this before. I've been to the part of spirit coming in. I hadn't been to the part of ego falling away.
mm,
So,
wow.
that was always, the awareness then was that that's what could happen, but it didn't, normal ego life went on
Mm,
until, my mid 50s.
wow. I tell you, it reminded me as well of like a couple of experiences I had pre-course. So it certainly reminded me of like the way that I can retrospectively kind of identify my childhood was like around the age of 14 was when I kind of stopped and said to myself, what is this that you're listening to? What is this relationship? I felt like it was like a communion, like a mental communion that I hadn't analyzed because I was just such a young kid. But then when I did, that added an external pursuit of like investigation into something. I don't know, let's say you always knew how to ride a bike instinctively, and then you stopped one day and said, well, what is this riding a bike business all about? And then you started to look
Right.
into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Right.
um, and then I mean, I didn't clock this till a long time later. But I know like around 2 or 3 years before I got the course, maybe like 1990, 1989, there was two experiences. One was like, see, just a revelation. It was just like, this is the interconnectedness of everything, and just an experience of this one pulsation of energy to everything. And I could hear my own voice as I was speaking to a couple of people that I was with, and it sounded really zingy and to the point like where I didn't recognize the sound of my own voice, because it was so like up and like pure, and it's just like, who, what, oh, it's me, it was a really incredible experience. And then and I was thinking, so is that part of what helped me to be ready to invite the course into my life? And then even prior to that, I remember being someone who struggled to say no to people, once when somebody knocked at the door, and it was like the happy clappy squad had all come round and they were going down the street knocking on everyone's doors going, hey, have you got time to talk about Jesus? But it wasn't like the stern Jehovah's Witness guys in there with their leaflets and their suits and coats, and these guys were all like, "Wee!" And someone else would have just shut the door, and I was like, "Okay, come in." And they all sat around in the lounge at my house and got, I don't know, I was a late teenager, and they sort of invite, let's invite Jesus into Leon's life, and I kind of like closed my eyes and sort of having a look around, what you're all up to. And they said, and then when they left, they were like, come to our meeting. And I kind of obviously agreed to it because I was doing this whole people pleasing thing. And then like a week or whenever it was, and I went to the building where they were having the meeting, and I got all the way to the door downstairs, and I could hear upstairs all this sort of la la come by our kind of thing. And I was like, I can't do this. Turned around on the ball of my foot and just whoosh, leg.
Right.
But again, I look back and think, was that an invitation? Did those beautiful people, with what they wanted for me, were they preparing something? And it was only so interesting when you contextualize things in the past from where you are
Right.
now. And I think that's why, when Judy always said that the course is a living document and it meets you where you are. And Ken would say, like, it starts off as dualistic kind of language, and then as it progresses, it speaks to you in a non-dualistic way. But it has to, and I've seen you quote this as well, the course meets us in the framework of the ego because that's where it's needed. And then you come back to that paragraph, and you've read it for 10, 20, 30 years, and where you are today has a completely different meaning.
And it's deceptive in its language. I mean, because you do read it, well, not so much in the language, but the practice. The practice is very different from the way this language makes it sound. Even when you go to practice it, it's something that, for example, it talks about the way it makes it sounds is like we're creating some sort of brotherhood of man kind of thing. But in the practice, what you're learning is that you're learning to see something past the person. So it has nothing to do with what's going on in the world and that. And so it's not until you're practicing it that you get that. I mean, I that's what happened to me was because I came from already having the experiences.
Mm.
I felt often that I was reading it in a different way than I was in a study group when I first started it. I was only 20, so most of the people were middle-aged or,
Mm.
and a lot older than me. And I felt like the way they were reading it and what I had experienced were kind of like two different things.
Right.
But in the actual doing of the lessons, you find that what I experienced was where the lessons will take you, as opposed to the way that it reads.
Mm.
It's the practices. It's all in the practice. That's what really you know gets you where it means to take you, and that's where you find the non-duality, not always in the language. It's certainly there in some of the language, but It does. It's speaking to ego, and in the whole context of ego.
Mm.
But in the practice, that's where you find the non-duality.
Mm. Beautiful. See, again, with linear time collapsing, that's kind of like what I guess I must have been sensing when I was saying to you, how do you feel like your personal journey through the material has been, with that almost, you could say, the reverse sequence, to have that revelation. I think about me and my wife, and it's like, if something came in the post that needed assembling, and she opened the box, she'd just start building it and she'd get it right. Whereas me, with my man left brain, I'm like, I'm going to get the instruction, I'm going to make a cup of tea, get the instruction, read everything about it, and then build it. And if I gave her the instruction booklet, it would just kill her vibe totally. It would confuse her and create like a fog, because she's just like, goes to it as an experience like that. So it made me think of that when I was thinking of how interesting it is, the way that the sequence played out for you.
Yeah, yeah. And now, kind of like at the end point, sort of post atonement, I see the whole thing in a very different way, because I used to see it as getting somewhere.
Hmm.
Now I understand that everything is an expression. So you know how you talk about things having come before to sort of soften the ground for the course. To me, those things were just the whole thing was an expression of the atonement through you. The light, a little bit of light, a little bit more light, a little bit more light, the whole, that, and that's the way I look back now and realize it's an expression, rather than we don't have to make the atonement. We're watching it be expressed.
Beautiful. And again, I think, sometimes it's like, I think about a 100-watt light bulb, and the way we're told in the course that, you can let the fire go down to the merest spark, but you can't let it go out. And life does that to loads of us. Loads of us have had that moment where you do say there must be another way. And interestingly, again, recent conversation sort of talking about people rarely come to that decision from a good place. It's not like you're in on the good foot and just like, oh, I wonder what it'd be like to deconstruct my construct of myself, and all the concepts I've got about relationship and the world, and how,
Right.
oh yeah, I might try that. Yeah, after dinner,
Right.
we've had pudding. It kind of needs to come.
Drives people. Yeah. 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 I've had most of my clients, of course, that's been their story, that sometimes they were just seeking, and then eventually it kind of evolved into the Course in Miracles coming into their lives. But often they didn't really do anything with it until something painful happened. But I've met a few people that have they've gotten everything in life that they aimed for. They've reached, middle age, and they have all the money and the property and all the relationships, and they've done everything. They've done all the traveling. They've done it all. They've done everything they've wanted to do. And they're like, isn't there something more? Yeah. I've done it. It was like they set out to do all the things that were set up to go pursue.
Mm.
And they've done it, and they have it, and they're happy. They're content. They're not in pain. They're not discontent in a personal way. Their relationships are fine. Money's good. Career's okay, and yet they're like, there's got to be something more than this.
So in this journey, when we get to the shift in consciousness, as you describe it, can you tell us a bit about that, please?
Um, it came to me first as in 2017. Well, what had happened was, actually, I have to kind of back up to
Mm.
about 2011. I was meditating, and I'd had moments before where I felt like spirit was right here.
Mm.
The way it came to me, though, was that the enlightened mind is here.
Mm.
You don't have to attain it. It's already here, whole and perfect.
Mm.
And I felt that, in a way, touched it before, kind of being like, just
Okay.
tapped it. But all of a sudden, just very casually in an ordinary everyday meditation. I was sitting on my couch. I remember that it just came in. The enlightened mind is here. It's whole and complete. And after that, and I didn't know this till I wrote my memoir. The writing in my journal changed the complete view. And even though of course I remembered that moment, and I was conscious of it having informed how I went ahead and what my teaching was and so forth, I did not really realize until I was writing my memoir and was reading through my journal what that that there was a shift. There was an actual shift then. It was just that it had come in so quietly. And it was, but I did know that it was after that that I started to become increasingly uncomfortable. And about 2014, I became aware that something had happened, that something had been going on. It was like I was finally seeing it. I was growing increasingly uncomfortable. There was this place in my mind that was barren. And I mean barren like the moon, not barren like a desert, because the desert has some life. The moon is lifeless, completely lifeless place in my mind. And I was growing, it was getting pretty dark. I mean, it was, you know, all the dark things people will say about God. God is this emptiness, you know, and things like that. It was like I was starting to believe that, and it was dismal and dark, and then and it just, this kind of just kept going on, this increasing discomfort, and I started to have experiences where I felt like a ghost in the world. Like I couldn't touch the world anymore. I was dead, and I couldn't touch the world anymore. And I started to feel elsewhere.
Right.
Like I wasn't really here. I was really someplace else. And when I started to have these experiences, ego would say, "This means I'm dead." I would just hear it clear in my mind. This means I'm dead. And so there's this growing discomfort with these new experiences that were disconcerting.
Right.
And then in 2017, in that spring, instead of that yucky emptiness, I started to experience this beautiful spaciousness in my mind. Mostly I felt it in the evenings when I was playing a word game on my computer, on my laptop. It was like when my mind was quiet, and I started to crave playing the game, because when I did that, I became aware of this beautiful spaciousness that was there, and it was kind of like I could just bask in it. And then that summer, it was like the golden light of Christ burst into my mind, and I had not had that experience since I was 20. I knew what it was. I welcomed it, but it was anxious. I was also very anxious about it, because I, didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I had this burst of creativity and wrote a couple of novels. They were love stories that were metaphors for me they're just basic stories, nobody reading it. There's nothing spiritual in them at all. They're personal growth stories. But they're metaphors for for me. And it's really hard to describe what that time was like. It was wondrous. The creativity was like nothing I'd felt before. And I had written, outside of the writing I had been doing, as a teacher. I'd written when I was young. I tried to write novels and so forth. So, and that hadn't been around for a long time, so there I was. I just got these, these books, and the mystical part of that whole experience started to kind of quiet down. That I knew there was like just this general something in the air. And then I think about April the following year, I found myself in a holy relationship again, which I had experienced at 20 when I began the course. It was one of the mystical experiences I had then. And I had to tell my wife about it. And she was not a student of the course. She didn't like to hear about my path. I mean, early on, when we first met, I had tried to explain it to her, but it scared her. She was Christian, and the 12 steps were her path.
Okay.
Really. So she didn't want to know. So over the years, she kind of knew what I did, and we could speak in terms of, she would, I would say Holy Spirit, she would say higher power, and we had that kind of commonality, but we
Nice.
didn't really have the same spiritual pursuits. And then so anyway, I tell her about this, and I tell her this on her birthday. I tell her about this other woman in my life that I feel I have a holy relationship with. I don't really know yet what it means.
Yeah.
And I tell her on her birthday, and at her birthday dinner, we go afterwards to this bookstore, and it hits me. I had expected to feel relief because I thought, okay, this is what's going on. I just have to tell her and I'll be relieved, because I could feel this like building pressure.
Yeah.
And then I just knew walking around in the bookstore that something huge was going on, that it wasn't just my marriage, that I was going to go through something I couldn't avoid. And it was, it was like inevitable. And I kind of made a commitment then to not resist, because I knew that would make it worse. And that was really all I could give to it, was to not resist, because I knew what something was taking me over. And also something was completely gone now. And that was and then it just kind of all hell broke loose after that. I ended up just leaving that whole entire life, my wife, my house, our dogs, I mean, everything. I went to Australia for a year and then came back, and things had gone on, but it got very dark in my mind. It got really, really dark. I was aware of being in a new I missed the most important part. After that, after telling my wife and knowing something big was going on, I went through the moment I called the break. And at that moment was when I felt something fall away. And I felt like I shot upward in consciousness. At the time, it's taken me until, I think it was only last year, I figured out what exactly fell away at the break.
Right.
And it definitely seemed like the person of Liz that had been here went away. That's why her whole life had to go. I mean, it was gone.
Yeah.
It was dead. That, she died. In my mind, she died, which is very hard to convey to the people in my life, especially my now ex-wife. I told her, I said, I see you as the other Liz's widow. I mean, because that whole connection there was gone. And I was happily married,
Yeah. Yeah.
all that was all gone. That whole life was gone. And anyway, what I realized last year, that what actually fell away was ego's denial of God. Because what happened at the break, it was like, here's ego as the center of my consciousness.
Right.
And that whole uncomfortable thing was spirit coming, and the break was boop.
Got you.
Yeah. So spirit took the center of consciousness. Ego, which was actually, it didn't, I wish it had gone, but it just kind of went. So it was very close and still very powerful. And I felt like what had happened was, it could no longer deny that. It couldn't deny God anymore, because here it was in my conscious awareness. And that's basically what's happened. So basically from then on, I went through it's the dark period, all of the drama I went through. And all of the darkness was ego's drama and ego's darkness. I want to make that clear to people, that this isn't, the darkness isn't spirit. I want them to understand that light that came, when it came after that, I was always in a different context. I'm like in a new dimension. And it's always here. Even when I was going through the darkness, it's like the darkness was here, but the light was always all around it. Even though I couldn't access it, it was here. And I always knew that. And that got me through, as I just knew I would come out the other side. I knew I was in some process, but I didn't know how long it was going to take. And it's still going on 6 years later, but I'm in a much better space after going through a long, dark time. 2.5 years were really, really, really rough. Wow. And then one day it was, I felt what I call the cosmic chuckle. I felt this chuckle come from deep within. And it came from a place I had never felt before.
Wow.
And it was like, oh, you're so silly. and after that, a Joker or a Harlequin is a symbol of Christ to me now, because that's what it was like. It was like, you know how in the old courts, that the jester was there. They had the jester to keep things light, right? So that the monarch wouldn't take themselves too seriously. And that's kind of how that's what it felt like. It was like something, it was like this pinpoint of light that just broke right through the darkness and said, "Oh, you're so silly." And ever since then, I knew then that something hopeless, the first hope I had in all the darkness I'd been in, something now, and it did, it changed after that. Very, very, very slowly, but it has only gotten better since. And that was, I don't know when that was exactly, but anyway, so, and then the memoir, it was like, I wrote the memoir soon after I got back from Australia. I was still in a dark place, but I also knew that it had to be written. The whole thing just came to me one day, as well as the title and everything else. It just, I knew it had to be written then, because I was going to forget, what ends up in it. I knew eventually I would forget it. I was not going to remember what the old life was like. I was not going to remember what I was, the darkness and everything I was going through. I knew eventually that wouldn't be there. So I wrote that still in a pretty dark place. And I think that's right. It was towards the end of it that cosmic chuckle happened, and it ends up, it's in the afterword of the book, because and so it had just been through. And like I said, it's only gotten better since. I mean, like last year, I mean, odd things happening, like the memories of the childhood experiences.
Yeah.
And last year I went through a life review. Yeah, but I don't even mean of major events in Liz's life. I mean weird things, like what it was like to sit in my fourth grade classroom, what it felt like to lay on the couch when I was a kid in the house I grew up in.
Yeah.
Just these memories, and it's not like I just sit there and have them. They would come and go. I mean, I might like have 2 or 3 days of it, and then it'd be gone for a while, and then come again. So last year I went through that, and simultaneously cleaned out some family stuff, things that were boxes and things, and all that kind of converged at the same time. Um, and then the past year in particular, things got a lot better. I started to have a lot of insights about what I went through, like, that moment of the break was, that ego could no longer deny God. I mean, that denial of God couldn't stand up anymore.
Beautifully expressed. Yeah, totally, totally, totally get that. And also, I love the way that, you know, we can reframe all of these experiences. You could say, oh, it's all gone, it's linear time, but you can forgive the past and you can forgive yourself for thoughts that you projected into the future in the present, based upon what you've remembered, what you've reconnected with today, through removing the interference, like you said, of what's always been there. And
Yeah.
I love that. I think as well, that's interesting. That's tapping into some of the stuff that I've got in my notes, because I was thinking about orientation. And some of my notes are, like I've asked you already, it's like how did it shape the journey back to the self? Um, and also the proximity of the real world was something that I found myself writing. And another phrase that I'm not sure if I lifted it from Ken, but it's what you leave as vacant, God will fill.
Mm.
And that investment in the dream, when you are completely invested in the dream, where's the proximity of the real world then? It's all relative, isn't it? It's like,
It's always here. Basically what we're talking about when we talk about enlightenment, for example, is what's in conscious awareness. Because
mhm,
obviously spirit's always in your unconscious, it's there. It's
yeah,
always here.
mhm,
And so that what we experience as our spiritual process is that moving into our conscious awareness, usually in and out of our awareness. That's how it is most of the time.
yeah,
And then some of us, it happens that it breaks into our conscious awareness to stay.
Mm.
But it's all about our conscious awareness.
Mm.
And that's why, you know, so what ends up happening is this feeling of, what I realized was I was in a completely different experience of existence. You know, the experience of existence of ego is completely different from that's why I felt like in a new dimension and all those things before.
Mm.
And what's become clear to me is, I used to think that there was a neutral consciousness here that was choosing ego or spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I now know that consciousness has no agency of its own. It's just a space that either registers ego experiencing ego or spirit experiencing spirit. When spirit's here, all it is, spirit experiences is spirit. So when everything I've gone through, I've been describing all the terrible stuff I've been describing has been ego's experience of ego. It's basically ego is exposed to ego.
Mm.
You know, and I prefer the word enlightenment to the word awakening, because I found there's nothing, no part of God is asleep, has ever been asleep. And consciousness is just the space. It doesn't have the agency to sleep and then awaken. If there's an awakening, it's ego having a very rude awakening. Basically, to a lot of what I went through was extreme disorientation. The really dark and hellish time was a lot of disorientation and facing the insanity of ego, the delusion.
Mm.
You know, an illusion, it's delusional when you believe in an illusion, and that's what ego does.
Yeah.
Ego believes in an illusion.
Mm.
It believes in itself, which is an illusion. And that was what all of that is, all of that came up. That's all that came up, was exposed in the process. And that's what the great difficulty, you know, I went through was what it was really ego going through,
Mm.
a great difficulty, and still going through great difficulty.
Of course.
What's happened is, and I was told this in the middle of the darkness. I got a couple of people told me. It says after you have an experience like the break, what happens is ego winds down.
Mm.
But ego doesn't change. It's exactly like it always was. But what winds down is the power of it. The power of it. So it's diminished in power, although it's exactly the same. It's kind of fascinatingly the same.
Yeah.
It really doesn't change. It doesn't evolve. It doesn't change. It doesn't grow. It doesn't. It never will. It won't transform into spirit. It has to fall away. And it's it's just kind of exactly. It does exactly the same things it always has. But it's just the power of it is greatly diminished.
Yes.
So it kind of like falls further and further from the center. The power of the mind is no longer being given to it, so to speak.
Beautiful. Love that. So clear. And also the cosmic chuckle, you know, if you think about the symbolic use of the word laughter, you know, and into eternity there crept a tiny mad idea where the Son of God forgot to laugh. You know, this crops up a bit on the channel. It's just like, we can't laugh in eternity. You know, there's no consciousness. There's just the awareness, the perfect awareness of oneness. There's nothing to be conscious of when there's no duality, and there's no form. So there's no mouth. So there's no lips. So there's no voice box. So there's no laughter. But that purposeful use of that symbol to express that we forgot to laugh, and what is accessed through being in the joy, being in your joy, and what that unlocks in terms of what's now on the table for you to sort of draw from when you do find the joy again. And silly, yeah, you know, being silly, having a laugh, just, it's, you know, it's a beautiful, beautiful aspect of enjoying being alive, really. And something that I like as well when you're talking about, you know, the ego rebound as well, like a backlash and a rebound.
Yeah, yeah, that was the thing. When I studied the course, I studied on my own. I left the group I was with because I felt, you know, they weren't talking about the experiences I was having, and I studied with spirit basically. But I began to notice that I had a pattern of, if I had an insight from spirit or, anything inspired, ego would I'd have what I called an ego backlash, which
Yeah,
was,
it's great.
it would last, in the early days, it lasted weeks. I'd have just the smallest little experience and I'd have weeks of a backlash from ego. And over time, those, the length of time diminished, but uh, I thought, I thought this was just my mind, the way that, my mind worked. And what I learned was to not resist it. And it didn't last as long.
Yeah,
Because in the beginning, I was always trying to fix it. I was like, what did I do wrong?
yeah.
And it was like, no, just know this is going to happen.
Mhm.
So, even if I got an answer from spirit, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to have a backlash. I just kind of knew it. And, but when I started teaching, I found out how universal it was, that it's happening to everybody. And yeah, it was one of the, probably, I bet one of my earliest articles would have been about that, because I wanted people to know
Mm,
this is the process. It's
mm,
not wrong. It's nothing going wrong.
mm,
And you're not failing. You're not doing anything wrong. This is what will happen. And it kind of mirrors, in ego consciousness, what happens, when ego's falling away, that diminishment of power,
mhm.
in that if you just allow it to run down, it will run down.
Yeah.
So if you don't resist it, you're not feeding it, and you're not giving it power, and therefore it will run down
Mhm.
if you
Like
just
a
let it.
like a tired child throwing a tantrum in a supermarket aisle
Yeah,
because they're
yeah,
not allowed to
yeah.
have.
There's no greater ego than a child. They're all ego, and when we're born, we're like all, it's like pure ego, and then our parents have to kind of, you know, modify us and teach us how to live in the world with other people, because it's all me, 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 me. And that's it. So that's why egos always seem childish, because that's it. That's what they are.
And how have you observed in yourself, say in the last 5 years, when you are trying to assist somebody else in navigating their turbulence and vacillations? What what have you observed in how you deal with people that's a consequence of your shifting shifting consciousness? Is there something?
I don't think it's different.
Oh, okay.
That's what's been kind of interesting, is it made me realize, because a lot of one of the things I went through was, in the confusion of the first year or two afterward, was I felt very weak.
Mm,
Um, I don't mean physically, I just mean like, because what it was that ego was here. And in fact, I was pushing away. Um, so what I'm getting at is that spirit was already here to a great degree
hmm,
before the break happened.
hmm,
It had already been functioning in my life. It had already been teaching through me. And, but I ended up kind of pushing. What happened was ego was in me, was saying, I was having certain experiences that it was saying, oh no, that's the old Liz, that's gone. It turns out that was spirit, and that's why I was feeling so weak. I was pushing away the strength.
right.
And for a while, the ego was kind of dominating here, and was kind of having its say, and kind of ruling the space, so to speak.
Mm,
And I've reclaimed a lot that I had, and some of it was just too me questioning,
hmm,
because I was suddenly, my mind was in such a whole new place.
mm,
I was throwing things. I didn't know what was going to remain, what was to remain. So I was questioning everything.
sure.
So that just kind of left me in a very kind of weakened state.
Mm,
Um, and so what's come back in the past 2 or 3 years is that what was real, what has remained, what really was spirit the whole time. So the one thing that's been kind of constant is the teaching, and working one-on-one with my clients.
mm,
I that always, no matter the utter insanity that was going on in my mind, I was still able to do that. That was still here. And that's kind of, just looking back over the past few years and everything that came before, that's been a constant.
I'm just interested if you're describing like a process of identification and learning to identify with something beyond a long-held construct, whether that new idea.
That is what you're describing is what I expected, and that's not what's happening.
Right.
Because when I came out, I came out as a lesbian. That to me, that was a process of I had a false persona when I
Right.
came out to myself as a lesbian. I had been holding up a false persona, and that had to fall away, and the real Liz could emerge, kind of thing.
Okay.
And I thought that was a template. I always thought, oh, I have an advantage. I've been through an identity crisis before, and I have an advantage. And that was always how I pictured it. That's what I thought was going to happen. But that's not what happened. And because what that was, that template is not at all what happened. Like I said, consciousness is a space here. It wasn't, it turns out ego has always been identifying with ego. There's nothing here that identified with ego except ego. And no part of God has been lost to ego, has been dreaming of ego, has been involved with ego. It's almost like there are two different beings here, completely different beings. And what's happened is one has to get out of the way because the other one is here now. And so that whole sense of identity that I thought was going to transform has to fall away because there's a different identity here. And it's familiar to me because I experienced it as a child. And it's familiar to me because it's always been here. It's just what happens is with ego is it claims everything as itself. So everything going on in consciousness, it says, is it. And that's why we have to go through these periods of sorting out, as the Course phrases it.
Yeah.
Because ego has said, all of this is me. And it turns out it's not true. A lot of what I was experiencing already was spirit. And that's here too. And so it's familiar to me. It's not a stranger, but it's what's happened as they become sorted out. It's like I have these two beings here. And one has to fall away so the other one can emerge.
So in how you describe that, has that influenced how you listen, even maybe say, for example, how you'd listen to someone relaying something to you where they think they are consumed by something? Is there a part of you that
it changes it for me, but I have found when I try to teach them what I just told you, it goes nowhere.
Yeah.
Because they can't see it.
Yeah.
They're very involved. People are very involved in their stories. And the way that the thing is, because it's like we have these two eyes here, what we don't realize is we're often vacillating. The eye feels the same, but we're really two different. There are really two different eyes here. It's like consciousness has a shape, a certain shape, and when it says I, the I shape, so to speak, it's just that there are two different beings using that I, so it feels, they both feel very familiar, but they're two distinct things. But if somebody can't see that, I've found my telling them that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't help them. So I have to meet them where they are and speak to them in their language, even though I know their language, which is often the language of the Course in Miracles, is inaccurate. The Course in Miracles is not speaking accurately about how this is. What I'm sharing is not what the Course teaches, the way the Course reads. And that's because A Course in Miracles, that's where it became really clear to me that it's written to ego, in the ego framework.
Yeah.
For people in ego and how they see things. And it's just when then you go past it and you realize that the Course It's not that the course is wrong. It's that the
Yeah,
course
I
is
understand.
designed for, yeah, it's designed for a set of a state of mind. And I just frankly cannot take people to where I am.
No, sure, I
I can't
can.
bring them here. I can't show them this.
Mm,
It's only when they start to come here that I'm able to kind of help them
mm,
to see what they're feeling and what they're seeing. And then sometimes I'll see that illumination. I'll like, oh, that I see what this is. And again, we have it set up in our mind what we think it will be like, and it's not going to be that way, because all of our ideas are given to us in the false framework. And or even if you read something from like an enlightened master,
mhm,
you're going to read it through the false framework,
yeah.
but afterward you're going to read it in a very different way.
Mhm,
When I read a quote from some sage from long ago or whatever, it's like, oh, I know how I used to read it. Now I get it.
yeah.
It's a completely different thing. I mean, I know how I used to read it and what I expected because I read that. And now it's like, oh, no, that I see now. It's completely different.
Amazing, beautiful. So, in terms of like interesting, thinking about the Holy Spirit as being like present memory, and how that's like Ken would say that's like a paradoxical term, present memory, but a memory that we took with us into the dream, a golden thread, or you know.
In my very first study group, I remember the leader of the group. We must have come across that idea in there.
Mm,
And he said the way to understand that is like when you have a shopping list in your mind.
mhm,
You needed three things at the supermarket, right? And he says, so you you think about it before you leave, then you get to the supermarket and you remember, oh, I need milk and cheese and bread.
okay.
So it's a present memory. Even though the idea was planted,
Mm,
that was the example he gave of a present memory. That
no.
we use it all the time, that it's we're remembering something we thought before, but it's basically just still with us.
That's a powerful, yeah, that's a powerful use of that. So, what could you suggest as like a potential way of enhancing that connection for people listening?
The connection to spirit,
Yeah, yeah, just the present memory, just
the
instead
holy
of.
instant. Yeah,
Mhm,
the practicing the holy instant.
mhm,
Yes. And what it's interesting, there are certain things when the course has a way of introducing something and then never letting go of it. I mean, so it might not talk about the holy instant at all, but once it mentioned it, it just kept mentioning it. And the same thing with the Holy Spirit. And and that's one of those, the Holy Spirit and the holy instant and the holy relationship, those are its three primary instruments or tools or experiences, and they're all interrelated, of course. And it's just coming back into the present. And it's of course, if you've had experiences of spirit, it's easier because then you can at least remember them. Remember that, oh yeah, okay, you might not be feeling it right now, but you've felt it before, and you have a memory of that experience. And that's helpful when you want to come into the present with the spirit. But it's just, there's the ultimate coming into the present holy instant would be, doing a meditation, and the ultimate holy spirit. I mean, the whole holy instant would be a direct revelation of God, of course, but these are not things we make happen.
mm,
We're just sort of inviting them,
mm.
inviting spirit and trying to touch that, make that connection again.
That's a great word, yeah, invitation.
Yeah.
So, if you could, yeah, if you could sort of expand upon invitation, do you think it's just like.
It's just the openness to it. You're
Mm,
willing and to experience it. And
Mm.
I think where people um, get kind of lost is that it's like, if I don't feel anything, then nothing's happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this constant pursuit of feeling good,
Mm-hmm.
or this constant pursuit of feeling love, or and that gets in the way, having this kind of setting up this outcome that I have to feel something.
Mm-hmm.
And the invitation can be, it's like, to me, the invitation is like opening the door, and then the Holy Spirit will walk in when you need it. So it's like, it's just that opening, and not looking for the outcome. It's one of the reasons I think people get hung up on meditating is they're not feeling something they think they're supposed to feel.
Mm.
And it's like, just forget about outcomes, forget about how you're feeling, because a lot of what we see about spirit is more like, in hindsight, is that we can look back and see it, how it worked around us and in us and through us, rather than being constantly wanting to feel something.
Mm.
And once you start to see how it's been here, you start to recognize it and feel it. And but it's like, it's subtle, and that's the thing. It's not a burning bush experience.
Mm.
It can be very subtle, and that's
And
where it's
in a
lost.
world that's geared up for such like huge sensory impacts,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
we're always looking over at number 9, number 10 for the impact of something. It's like, dude.
Yeah. And that's why, spirit it's a still, quiet voice.
Mm.
And ego's got so many voices.
Mm.
So you're trying to pick that one quiet voice out of the many voices of ego.
Mm.
And when I say voice, it doesn't mean you're actually gonna hear something or hear words. It's just often an intuition. It's just a sensing of something here, or unformed thoughts, just
Mm.
ideas and that they came from someplace else. It's very
Mm.
subtle. It's not the dramatic. I mean, those experiences happen, the dramatic ones do happen, but I actually think, um when that's happening, it's ego is always somewhat involved when it's that dramatic.
Right.
um like, all the drama I've been through the past few years, which has included some dramatic mystical experiences, but
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of learned to not trust those so much.
Mm.
I think something genuine is happening there, but the drama around it, you know is ego, I think. Moses burning bush, to put it in terms of, it was a burning bush, it's ego. Whereas, but it doesn't mean something genuine isn't there, but I think ego comes in and takes it over, and makes something dramatic out of it. Because when I look at that experience of the enlightened mind just coming in and knowing it's here,
Mm.
and from then on, it was never gone for me. Just knowing that I didn't have to attain anything, it was here. That came in so subtly, you know. And then later on, I have all these really dramatic experiences, and they're interesting. But I've come to see that, you know what, I don't think there's anything in the drama, except the ego. I just can't. I don't think that the drama part of it really is spirit. It's ego feeling the impact of it in a way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, I understand exactly how you're using words to convey that to us. And what it makes me think of is like, when I'm giving counsel to people about the difference between non-reactivity and instantaneous reaction, and again, like that firework display, that instant gratification that ego gets of that food from it all, of like, rah, it's like, I don't know if I should use the word sated, because it's never sated, but to get that instant comeback from that expression, sometimes when somebody does have that outburst, then the ego the ego is kind of like it's had a decent fix from that
Yes. Yeah.
experience. And if you're non-reactive, let's say an event takes place on Saturday. You've got two choices. One, you have this huge outburst, and then the other one is you just like have a complete opposite experience. You sit, you wait, you do nothing, you let it be what it is, you don't judge, go through the forgiveness kind of model. Then you might get a bit tired on Tuesday. Guess who's going to chirp up about what you didn't do on Saturday? Then you need some food on Thursday afternoon, and you're a bit like, guess who's going to chirp up? Then someone does that. It's never going to let you go because on
Right.
Saturday it wanted you to give, you know, give all guns blazing. So in some respects, there's a lot more involved in that non-reactivity because it's annoying. It's like it's waiting to bring it up numerous times because you didn't jive with it on the day.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's actually happened to me quite a bit. It's like I've learned to just let ego have its say, because otherwise it's going to have its say somewhere down the line. So, like the course says, the ego always speaks first, right? You're just, there's the emotion before you have time to think. And it's like I learned to just let that happen and then not judge it. Say,
Yeah.
okay, that was ego.
Yeah.
And then I could be a little bit more sensible about something, but I had to be okay with that outburst, whether it was with others or whether it was just in my own mind, just the emotion or whatever. Is let it happen, then go past it. Because if I don't let it happen, then it'll erupt at some point in some other way. Sometimes inappropriately in our bodies or what have you, as
Sure.
illness
Yeah.
or injury or what have you. So
Mhm.
it's like the thing is, ego is not bad. It isn't wrong. It's simply false. And it's because we think it's bad or wrong that we start to want to repress it, and what's wanting to repress it? Ego. Ego wants you to think it's bad or wrong. The guilt is how it keeps it going. So it's like, just recognize it's false. So let it happen, let it happen. And then you can go past it. It's like a child that you have to let it run itself out and have its little outburst, and then
I find it amusing though. I mean, I'd sort of like go, wow, nice, if I'm driving and somebody does something, and that's like, it's just like wants to swear at that person or beep the horse, like, pooh, wow, okay. And just laugh, it's like, I'm not going to do that, but okay, thanks for that. No resistance, because the moment you resist, then you're in it, aren't you?
yeah, when you resist, yeah, it's always makes anything worse. Resistance is a way of holding on to something, really.
Mm, mm.
Instead of letting it flow past.
Yeah, because there's a lot of there's a lot of like stuff that comes with like a seed inside a seed or something like that, and maybe it's explained nicely when it says you have to justify your failure to forgive, when someone doesn't come from a place of forgiveness and they do attack someone, that sense of like having attacked someone and not being truly in harmony with that action, there's one level, one wave to it, but then also within it is that sense of like feeling like you've missed an opportunity to forget, or not even missed an opportunity, but you've not identified with that part of yourself that wants to forgive, really.
Yeah, if you can do it, then
Mm,
there's really no missed opportunity,
yeah.
because as soon as you realize you haven't done it, you can do it. It's like, with the lessons, it's so common for people to say, oh, I haven't done the lessons all day. I'm supposed to be remembering this lesson every hour. And I'm like, well, do it now. You know? Instead of lamenting that you haven't done it.
Jump straight on eBay. Course in Miracles for sale. I'll send it to you. Free postage. You can have my copy now. I forgot to do my lesson. Oh. Brilliant. Let me see what I've got in my notes here. So this is interesting. I thought we might have a look at this. There's a little quote from the course. I think it looks like it's from chapter 27. I'm not big on all of that, really. I just like to pick out what I like. But it says, as nothingness cannot be pictured, so there is no symbol for totality. Reality is ultimately known without a form, unpictured and unseen. Forgiveness is not yet a power known as wholly free of limits. Yet it sets no limits you have chosen to impose. Forgiveness is the means by which the truth is represented temporarily. It lets the Holy Spirit make exchange of pictures possible until the time when aids are meaningless and learning done. No learning aid has use that can extend beyond the goal of learning. When its aim has been accomplished, it is functionless. Yet in the learning interval, it has a use that now you fear, but yet will love. What comes to mind for you hearing that?
Well, I mean, just how, how forgiveness in the course is so different from the way the world thinks of it. I mean, in the course, forgiveness is recognizing only God is real and nothing else is real. Nothing real is happening here. But initially, we can't generalize in that sense, and let it all go all at once. So we have these experiences that are painful, and we decide we want to let it go or what have you, and we offer up as an opportunity for forgiveness. And one of the ways the course suggests is to just ask for another way to look at it. And that can come in so many different forms. Nobody can tell you what that will be in each individual circumstance. And then it will be something that's meaningful for you in the time. It's kind of like the way that the course talks about the ladder of prayer. You start down in the supplication way, and eventually it becomes communion. So it's kind of like same thing with forgiveness. These things that are happening to you are so real. There's no way you can leap to, no, this isn't this, somebody's hurt you. There's no way you can leap to, oh, this isn't real. You just can't go there. Yeah. So the way to do it is to invite spirit in. And that in itself is a kind of an act of forgiveness, because you're inviting the truth into your mind to take the place of the error, basically, the illusion. And then you'll be given another way of looking at it, or something that will help you release the circumstance or the person or the whatever. I mean, ultimately we're always forgiving ego and ourselves, because it's the way we look at it is bothers us, not what happens. So it's all of these things come in. It's a matter of degrees and stages and steps until you can learn to generalize.
Like we're learning another language as well, isn't it? When we get to that point, from specifics to non-specifics, or thought forms to existence without form. It's like it's hard to conceive of a way of having a foot in both camps, really, in terms of like the movement towards one from the other, like you said, with the ladder, going up the ladder, and also, with that, we might go up a rung, we might go up 3 rungs, and then we'll come down 1 rung, and then we'll go up 2, and then we'll come down 4, and then we'll go up 5, and then there's just like And I think, the lack of resistance and the allowing and the observation of the vacillations is like such a helpful sort of standpoint to just to kind of like dissipate and dilute the guilt.
Mhm.
Because, if you think interestingly, with the course where it'll say I have no neutral thoughts and that I see no neutral things, the way the world's geared up is like we got positive, negative, and there's neutral in between as like an option. But the course is like there aren't 3 points. There's either love or fear, or
Right. Yeah.
form or formlessness, or abstraction, or dualistic, or however you want to word it. But I just think, it's really helpful for people to have stuff to turn over in their own minds and translate into their own internal language, where they can use these dualistic, what's it, the phrase that I like is we can use the language of duality without believing it,
Mm. Right.
because otherwise there's going to be no conversation, is there? You and I are sitting here for an hour just going like that because language is a concession. But then
Yeah,
we're
the problem is that people are expecting the personal experience to change. And what happens is there's something else here instead. So I mean that goes on, but there's something else here that recognizes that's not real.
nice.
So yeah, that's why people think they're looking in other words, they're looking for the world to be non-dualistic, and it's really your mind that changes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why people will say, Liz, you say you're elsewhere, but I see you. And I'm like, the I that's speaking when I say I'm elsewhere is not a Liz. It's not Liz. Don't look to Liz to find the I that's here now. It's like that this is, gosh, this is just absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing is happening here. Absolutely. You know? And it's like, don't ever look to a person to find the truth. It's in you. And that's the only place you can find. That's where you're going to find the real world. It's not going to be the material world you're in, that you're seeing. That's not going to change and become some nirvana. It's you have it already whole and complete in your consciousness, in spirit. And that's the real world. And that's what happens is that comes into your consciousness and then takes precedence over what is happening with the person. And it's not concerned with that at all. And that's just a meaningless appearance occurring.
And then the word holy can be applied to the instant and the relationship and the spirit.
Right.
And holy is still a symbol in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you've got a microphone over there, but that feels like the mic drop moment.
Right. I'll drop my mouse.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, there's a lot for me to absorb in that. Really nice. Is there
Thank you
anything?
for having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Is there anything that you would like to point people towards in terms of resources or stuff they can engage with on the back of the connection that they might have hopefully felt through spending an hour?
Well, there's my website, acim.com, and you can find out about all my books.
Okay. Is there four
And
books, Liz?
huh?
Is there four
Uh,
books?
oh, many more.
Oh, right. Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's 4 volumes of my articles.
Okay.
There's and then I translated the course into plain language. And so that's 2 volumes. And then I have 4 Habits for Inner Peace, which is one of my more popular books. And
Okay.
and then Releasing Guilt for Inner Peace, which is a companion to that one. And so
Yes,
there's plenty of books.
I've read about
And
it.
yeah, so you can find those there. Sign up for my newsletter there. Find out more about me, how to contact me, and all any. And this interview will end up there, and all the any other interviews or talks I've given there
Yeah.
as well.
Well, I'll put your website obviously in the video description. And yeah, I've really enjoyed your website. There's some lovely stuff on there, and thank you for sending the articles. Like I said to you earlier before we pressed record, there's some beautiful stuff in there, really interesting and fresh. There's something fresh about your viewpoint, which I like, and something I like the straight talking aspect of things as well. Been really interested to read what you've done, and it's been a very, very enjoyable conversation. You've given me plenty to think about there, and in a nice, unconvoluted form as well.
Thank you. Clarity, clarity, clarity seemed to always be my thing since I started writing. That's what it was always about, was clarity, clarity, clarity. Yeah, and practical and realistic about where people are and what they're experiencing. And yeah, I'm not good with the fluffiness.
But like I said to you earlier, now that's really important for the character of what's presented itself through the process of this podcast. Because, like I said to you, I didn't have a plan, I didn't have a blueprint, and that's one of the really, really prevalent sort of drivers. Is like, right, how can we? I don't know if translate the material, but just give help it come off the page to something that,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Be very practical about it. Yeah,
yeah, and apply it and have like a toolkit, an experiential toolkit, so that you can get the most out of your experience.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So thank you very much for adding all of those wonderful tools to the toolkit.
You're welcome.
And thank you for the conversation, and be well.
You too.
Cheers, Liz.
Good night.
Bye.